Welcome to the Paul Smith College Adirondack Watershed Institute's Aquatic Invasive Species Spread Prevention Training. In this section, we're going to learn a little bit more about the species of concern in the Adirondack Park from AWI Operations Manager Sue O'Reilly.
Hi, this is Sue again, and this is your narrated presentation. So Corey's on Plant ID gave you a start on how to look at the plants, and as I said in the intro, this species overview will concentrate on key characteristics of important species. These are our learning objectives. This is your first look at these species, or for the returners, a refresher, on the invasives already established in our area or nearby, the native lookalikes, and an emphasis on hydrilla. We will also review the sample ID protocol, where you can text pictures to dispatch for immediate identification. So if you start looking at plants during your first days of work and you feel like the bottom half of this applies to you, don't worry. If you already feel like that right now, it's okay. Because when I started stewarding in 2014, everything that came off the boats just looked like a bunch of weeds to me. I'd never taken a botany class. I knew nothing. And the only thing that makes it easier is experience and repetition. But if you're brand new to this, concentrate on the items I'll show you today, and you'll be able to recognize the basics and build on them. These three here, Eurasian water milfoil, variable leaf milfoil, and curly leaf pondweed, the most common invasives already established in our immediate region. They aren't everywhere, but they're in a lot of places. Variable leaf is more commonly found on the western side of the park, and Eurasian is more common on the eastern side, but there's crossover, and some lakes have both. Some lakes like Lake Flower have all three. For Eurasian water milfoil, the clipped leaf end is the most distinctive feature. You can see it very well in the left picture. It's like someone took scissors and cut a flat line across the tips of the leaves. Also, the whorls in Eurasian are spaced out along the stem. Sometimes they're spaced out considerably farther than the picture on the right here shows. There'll be long spaces of the stem where there's no leaves attached, so keep an eye out for that. And variable leaf milfoil, rather than the whorls being spaced out on the stem like Eurasian, has a dense leaf arrangement. The submerged picture on the bottom right here shows why it's referred to as having a bottle brush arrangement. Now remember that most aquatic plants collapse into themselves when you pull them out of the water, so the best way to get a look at their leaf structure is to float them in water. Your steward gear will include Tupperware containers for this purpose. And also for variable leaf, keep in mind that the thick red or brown stem is another important feature. There are more than one species of native milfoil, and these two here, northern water milfoil and alternate flowered, are the ones I see most commonly in the samples collected in our program. But I don't see them all that often because the invasives are much more prolific in the lakes where they're established. The native northern here on the left is much less dense and substantial than the variable leaf bottle brush structure. And the alternate flowered on the right has leaves without clipped ends. They're usually smaller and cupped upward. So yes, as the title says, milfoils are confusing. They can be hard to identify when they're young pieces, and even harder if the sample is very small or very degraded. But once again, don't worry. You will take pictures either within the WISPA tablet survey or texted straight to dispatch for live identification. If you can't get a live ID from dispatch, you will also bag samples to give to your regional supervisor. If they can't identify, they will ask me. So you're not on your own with this. We'll go over the sample protocol at the end of this presentation. Here is curly leaf pondweed. When it's fresh or not long out of the water, this lasagna noodle appearance is very clear. The edges are also serrated. It's not going to be visible to you here, but at in-person training, you will see both dry pressed and thawed versions of actual plants, and you can easily see those serrations with the naked eye. Your regionals will also have those laminates during the season for refresher training. Here we have an array of other pondweeds, native pondweeds. Potamogeton is the genus for pondweeds. Curly-leaf pondweed is also a potamogeton, but these are native. They're large-leaf pondweeds, clasping-leaf pondweed, variable pondweed, and others, but you don't need to worry about species level identification for the natives. You can study the main guide that is on all of your tablets if you want to know more, but the important thing is there's a lot of them, so many pondweeds. So just look for the serrated edges because the natives do not have that feature. Curly leaf can lose that obvious lasagna noodle appearance once it's out of the water for a while, but those serrated edges don't go away. So watch for those. And hydrilla. I heard a good comparison once that if invasive milfoil is like a pretty good trash can fire in your kitchen, hydrilla is like your entire house burning down. Its growth rate is the highest of our known invasive plants of concern, and it will completely take over a waterway. The top right picture here that looks like a road going between two fields is actually a reservoir in Alabama after they mowed a path through the hydrilla. You can see the handful of places it has already established in our state listed here: Cayuga Lake, Croton Reservoir, Erie Canal. So if you see boats from any of these locations, for Cayuga Lake, if they just say Finger Lakes in general, inspect it like it could be from Cayuga Lake. Inspect them with extreme care. They're controlling it pretty well in all these areas, but it can still escape. In these pictures, you're unlikely to be able to see the difference, but hydrilla has more than 3 leaves per whorl, typically 5. Native elodea has typically 3 leaves. And like curly leaf, hydrilla also has serrations along the leaf blade. So that should be sticking out to you already, that serrations on the leaves are a common invasive characteristic. Unfortunately and annoyingly, there is another invasive called Brazilian elodea that shares traits with both hydrilla and the native elodea. But the key part is the number of leaves in the whorl. Brazilian also has more than 3. In this chart, you can see the 5 leaves on hydrilla around that nickel, and then Brazilian with many more leaves, and then native with 3. So more than 3, sample it and alert dispatch immediately. Hydrilla is such a high priority that we need to handle suspected cases right away. So water chestnuts aren't established in the interior of the Adirondacks, but they're in Lake Champlain, most heavily infested at South Bay Launch. There's also a lot in the Hudson and Mohawk rivers. See these lethal little nutlets here on the left? They have incredibly sharp points that dig into trailer bunks and catch in equipment crevices and just hang on for dear life. So look for them very carefully, especially on carpeted trailer bunks. At one point last year, the Welcome Center found a boat that had over 50 water chestnuts on a single trailer. But be especially careful when you remove them because the points are viciously sharp. These are the 2 types of invasive mussels, zebra and quagga. Zebra is the one that you'll commonly see attached to boats in our area because they're established in Lake Champlain, the St. Lawrence River, Lake Ontario, the Hudson and the Mohawk, and many other significantly sized water bodies close to the Adirondacks. Zebras have a flat edge on one side so they can sit up straight, whereas quagga mussels do not. They'll just rock over and lay flat. We've only found quagga a few times in our program history, but stay on watch for any mussels that look different, especially coming from Lake Erie, where they're more well established. You'll see dried zebra mussels at in-person training, and your regional will also have samples. So you'll see exactly what I mean about the D shape that can sit up on one edge. And these are Asian clams, which became well established in Lake George, cost them several $1 million to manage. They were one of the reasons why Lake George now has a mandatory inspection program. Their distinctive feature is the ribs along the shell. So if you find an Asian clam and you run your fingernail over them, your nail will click along those ridges. We also don't find them very often, but remember that they're still established nearby. And like zebra and quagga mussels, their young veligers can travel in standing water and not be visible to the naked eye. So these two water flea species are tiny zooplankton. They are what is referred to as small-bodied AIS, and the mussel veligers are also small-bodied AIS, which is a main reason for decontamination programs to kill off anything found in standing water. Spiny water flea is established in Lake Champlain and a handful of our other southern lakes like Great Sacandaga Lake, Indian Lake, the smaller Sacandaga Lake, and Piseco Lake. So take a close look at the AIS list in your steward bin so you can push decontaminations for any boat that's coming from those lakes. The place they usually are visible is on fishing line. These pictures here are hundreds or thousands of them attached to the lines in clumps. Fishhook water flea was found in Lake Champlain at the end of 2018, and then its growth exploded in 2019. The picture on the right is from 2019. And these clumps smell like grim death when they start to rot too. It's really disgusting. So if you work Lake Champlain and we have the right water temperature conditions for water flea population explosions in some areas, you might see things like this. As this says, there are many other invasive species. You can't expect to master all of them, but you can review these basics and read more of the literature in your steward bin and the resources on your tablet. You start off the season getting confirmed identifications for all interceptions, but you will get clearance from me or your regional supervisor to identify certain species on your own after we're confident that you know it well. But whenever you are uncertain about something, always follow the sample ID protocol. And this is our protocol for identifying. You have two options. Number one, text a good picture to dispatch. As this says, if you need to enter other surveys before I reply, save that survey as a draft and reopen to enter the species when I confirm. Now it's critical that you don't throw away the sample until I give you that ID, because I might have to ask you for a more close-up picture, or I could be stumped and need you to bag it for your regional supervisor. But this protocol works very well because you have the advantage of knowing the species when it's fresh in your hand and being able to study it. But if you aren't able to text pictures, either there's no cell signal at your location or you don't have the capability or data to use your phone, you need to do option number two. This is the standard way we used to identify samples in the past, so it works. It just isn't as immediate as texting dispatch. These are examples of good pictures for identification. Close up and against a white background. I can easily tell that we have invasive curly-leaf pondweed and coontail, which is a native, on the left. Clasping leaf pondweed, which is also a native, is in the middle, and native elodea is on the right. So whether you text me or take your pictures in the WISPA survey, always take your pictures like this. You'll find a blank laminated white sheet in your bin that you can lay the plants on, or you can put your Tupperware on top of that sheet too, if you float them in water. And these are examples of bad pictures. Far away against the ground, or held in your hand against the grass and out of focus. The steward on the left was from a few years ago, but I still covered his face so I wouldn't embarrass him. So please, please do not take your pictures like this because it's nearly impossible to see any detail. White background in the brightest light possible is the proper way. These are the sample bags that you'll find in your steward bin. If you have to bag samples, make sure you always fill out the entire label because otherwise we can't link it to the right boat within your WISPA data. Do your best to identify the species, even if you're not 100% certain, then pass the sample to your regional supervisor. And this table you'll also find in your bin. Whatever lake or lakes you work, check this list so you can learn what is established there. If your lake is not listed on this table, it means there are no AIS known to be established yet. Also review the other lakes so you can learn to recognize when a boat is coming from a lake that's infested. This picture shows how the plants will really spread out once you float them, so always do that when you need a better look. Like this says, it's the best way to take a picture. And one final time, pictures, text to dispatch if you can, take samples, and ask your regional supervisor for help. During the season, you'll have continuing education to reinforce these points and familiarize you with some other species, so you'll have plenty of opportunity to sharpen your skills. Okay, so that's the end for our species overview. Before taking the quiz, you can review the unnarrated copy of this presentation if needed, and please put any questions or comments into the discussion section once you are finished.